in stark contrast to the often repressed or sin-focused views of sexuality in many other ancient cultures. Ancient Egyptian society held a more open and matter-of-fact attitude towards sex and nudity. This perspective is evident in their art, literature, and religious beliefs, which frequently depict and allude to sexual themes, without the same sense of shame or moral judgment that would later become prevalent. For the ancient Egyptians, sexuality was an integral and celebrated aspect of life, deeply intertwined with concepts of creation, fertility, and rebirth. Nudity was not uncommon in ancient Egypt, particularly for children, servants, and laborers. The warm climate made clothing a secondary concern for many. While more formal attire was worn by the upper classes and on official occasions, the human form was not inherently seen as something to be hidden. This comfort with the body likely contributed to a more relaxed approach to sexuality. Art from the period often depicts individuals in various states of undress, reflecting a culture that did not equate nudity with impropriety. The ancient Egyptians' understanding of procreation was, by modern standards, a mix of observation and mythology. They understood that intercourse was necessary for conception, but their knowledge of the biological processes was incomplete. Fertility was of paramount importance, both for individual families and for the prosperity of the kingdom, which depended on a healthy and growing population. As such, fertility was celebrated through various rituals and religious practices. Deities like Min, the god of fertility, were depicted with erect phalluses, and amulets in the shape of genitalia were worn to promote conception and protect against infertility. Love and romantic relationships were also a significant part of Egyptian life, as evidenced by surviving love poetry. These poems express sentiments of longing, desire, and affection in a manner that is surprisingly relatable to a modern audience. They speak of the beauty of the beloved, the pain of separation, and the joy of union, indicating that romantic love and emotional connection were valued alongside the procreative aspects of relationships, while their society was relatively open. This is not to say that there were no social norms or regulations regarding sexual behavior. Marriage was the expected and socially sanctioned context for procreation and family life. Evidence suggests that monogamy was the norm for the majority of the population, although pharaohs and the very wealthy often had multiple wives and concubines. Incestuous relationships, particularly between royal siblings, are known to have occurred within the ruling dynasty, a practice that was likely intended to maintain the purity of the royal bloodline. Homosexuality is a more ambiguous topic in the study of ancient Egypt. While there are some textual and artistic hints that could be interpreted as depicting same-sex relationships, the evidence is scarce and open to various interpretations. Unlike in ancient Greece, there's no clear and widespread celebration or condemnation of homosexuality. In the surviving records, contraception and abortion were also known to the ancient Egyptians. Medical papyri describe various methods for preventing pregnancy, some of which had a plausible scientific basis, such as the use of honey and acacia fruit, which have spermicidal properties. This indicates a desire to control family size and to engage in sexual activity for reasons other than procreation. In their religious beliefs, sexuality played a crucial role in creation myths and the concept of the afterlife. The god Adam was said to have created the universe through an act of masturbation. The cycle of death and rebirth was also often framed in sexual terms, with the deceased hoping to be reborn into the afterlife, a process that mirrored earthly conception and birth. This integration of sexuality into their cosmology underscores its fundamental importance in their worldview. In conclusion, sex in ancient Egypt was far from a taboo subject. It was a natural and celebrated part of life, woven into the fabric of their religion, art, and social customs. Theirs was a society that acknowledged and embraced human sexuality in a way that was remarkably open for its time, focusing on its connection to fertility, creation, and the continuation of life. Marriage, adultery, and divorce, a social contract for the ancient Egyptians. Marriage was primarily a social arrangement rather than a religious sacrament. Its purpose was to found a house, GRGPR, and regulate property. While love poems suggest deep affection was prized, the practicalities were paramount. Women typically married after their first menses, around the age of 14, while men were slightly older, likely between 16 and 20, by which time they were expected to be established enough to support a family. Key feature of Egyptian marriage was the relative equality between partners, a stark contrast to many other ancient societies. Women could own and manage their own property, and any assets acquired during the marriage were considered jointly held. This financial independence granted women significant agency within the relationship and in society at large, though monogamy was the ideal and expected norm for most. Extramarital affairs were a serious matter, particularly for women. Adultery by a married woman was considered a grave offense, a violation that could threaten the stability of the family unit and the clarity of bloodlines. Punishments could be severe. Historical accounts describe penalties ranging from 1,000 lashes for the male accomplice to mutilation, such as slitting the nose of the adulterous woman, or even death. Despite the seriousness of the marriage arrangement, divorce was a recognized and relatively common practice. It was not seen as a source of disgrace, and either partner could initiate the process on grounds of incompatibility, abuse, infertility, or adultery. The financial arrangements of a divorce were often stipulated in marriage contracts. Typically, a woman leaving a marriage could take the property she brought into it, plus a significant share of the jointly held assets. This legal framework ensured that women were not left destitute and had the freedom to remarry, further highlighting their empowered status under Egyptian law. Prostitution and commercial sex. The exact legal and social standing of prostitution in ancient Egypt is complex and not as clearly documented as in other ancient cultures. However, evidence suggests it was a known and tolerated practice. Some historians believe prostitutes signaled their trade through specific attire or tattoos, such as images of the fertility god Bes on their thighs. It's important to distinguish commercial prostitution from sacred prostitution, a concept that is itself heavily debated. Some interpretations suggest that certain priestesses, particularly those in the cults of goddesses like Hathor or Isis, may have engaged in ritual sexual acts. These acts would not have been for commercial gain, but were seen as a spiritual service, celebrating fertility and bridging the gap between the divine and the mortal. Major festivals were often accompanied by feasting, drinking, and a relaxation of social norms, which could include more open expressions of sexuality. The enigma of the Turin Erotic Papyrus, perhaps the most famous and explicit piece of evidence regarding ancient Egyptian sexuality, is the Turin Erotic Papyrus, dating to the Ramesside period around 1150 BC. This unique scroll contains a series of 12 vignettes depicting men and women in various explicit sexual positions. The interpretation of this papyrus is a subject of ongoing scholarly debate. The men are depicted in a scruffy, balding, short, and paunchy manner, with exaggerated genitalia, which contrasts sharply with the idealized, youthful forms typical of formal Egyptian art. The women, however, are shown as nubile and are often adorned with erotic symbols like lotus flowers, which are associated with the goddess of love, Hathor. Some scholars have dubbed it the world's first men's mag, suggesting its purpose was purely for entertainment and titillation. The often humorous and satirical tone, particularly in the first section of the scroll, which depicts animals behaving as humans, supports the idea that it was meant to amuse a wealthy, aristocratic audience by playfully subverting social norms. Others propose a ritualistic or magical function, tied to the potent themes of creation and rebirth that were so central to Egyptian belief. The accompanying text, though fragmented, seems to express joy and pleasure, with one snippet reading, "Come behind me with your love. It is agreeable work." Regardless of its precise purpose, the Turin Erotic Papyrus provides a rare and candid glimpse into a side of Egyptian life that was clearly not meant for the formal walls of temples and tombs. Sexuality and the afterlife. The importance of sexuality extended beyond the mortal realm and into the elaborate Egyptian conception of the afterlife. Rebirth was a central tenet of their funerary beliefs, and this process was often framed in sexual terms. The act of creation was seen as a male prerogative, a power embodied by creator gods like Adam and Osiris, for both men and women to be reborn into the eternal paradise of the field of reeds. They needed to associate with this divine procreative power. Tomb art, therefore, is filled with imagery that, while not always overtly sexual, is rich with the symbolism of fertility and renewal. Depictions of the deceased in their idealized youth, surrounded by lush and bountiful landscapes, and holding lotus flowers, a known aphrodisiac, all point to the desire for a vibrant and sensually potent afterlife. The ability to procreate, to create life, was considered a divine power, and the hope was that this power would be renewed after death, ensuring an eternal cycle of existence. The divine and the erotic, gods of fertility and love religion permeated every aspect of Egyptian life, and sexuality was no exception. It was not seen as a base or sinful act, but as a divine force responsible for creation and regeneration. Several deities embodied this powerful connection. Min, perhaps the most explicit of the fertility gods. Min was a deity whose worship dates back to pre-dynastic times. He was almost always depicted as a human male with an erect phallus, often holding a flail in his raised right hand. As the god of fertility and procreation, he was believed to ensure the virility of men and the fruitfulness of the land. During great festivals, processions were held in his honor to celebrate his coming forth. Lettuce was his sacred plant, likely due to its milky sap, which was associated with semen. Hathor, one of the most popular and powerful goddesses. Hathor embodied love, beauty, joy, music, dance, and feminine pleasure. Often depicted as a cow or a woman with cow's ears, she was a protector of women, especially during childbirth. As the patron of cosmetics, wearing makeup was considered a form of worship to her, and offerings of mirrors and cosmetic palettes were common. Her temples and festivals were sites of joyous celebration, likely involving a degree of sensual and erotic expression. Bes, this dwarf god, was a beloved household protector, particularly associated with childbirth, fertility, and sexuality. Despite his fearsome, leonine face, he was a benevolent figure, thought to ward off evil spirits during labor and protect children. His image, often depicted as a dancing and sometimes ithyphallic figure, was a common motif on household items like beds, headrests, and cosmetic jars. Invoking his protection over these intimate aspects of life, symbols of life and desire, the Egyptian visual language was rich with symbols that carried potent sexual and regenerative meanings. The ankh, this looped cross, is one of the most recognizable symbols of ancient Egypt, representing life and eternal existence. Its origins are debated, but one compelling interpretation suggests it represents the union of male and female principles. The loop is seen as symbolizing the female genitalia, or womb, while the T-shape below represents the male phallus. In this context, the ankh is not just a symbol of life, but of the creative act of sexual union that produces life. It was often depicted being held by gods, offering the breath of eternal life to pharaohs. The lotus flower. The blue lotus was a powerful symbol with multiple layers of meaning. It was associated with creation and rebirth, as the flower closes at night and sinks underwater, only to re-emerge and bloom again in the morning, mirroring the cycle of the sun. This regenerative power was inherently linked to sexuality. The flower also had narcotic and aphrodisiac properties, and it is frequently depicted in party scenes and offered to guests, suggesting its use in enhancing sensual experiences. Genital amulets. Amulets shaped like male and female genitalia were worn to promote fertility and health. These were not considered obscene but were potent magical objects intended to harness the fundamental powers of creation and offer protection. Beauty, hygiene, and the art of attraction, physical appearance, and cleanliness were highly valued in Egyptian society, seen as signs of health, holiness, and self-respect. These practices were not just about aesthetics. They were deeply connected to attracting a partner and to one's readiness for the afterlife. Hygiene as a prerequisite. The Egyptians bathed daily, using a form of soap made from animal or vegetable oils mixed with alkaline salts. Not only cleansed the body but also treated skin conditions. Given the hot, dusty climate, cleanliness was a practical necessity, and it was also a religious one. Texts like the Book of the Dead stipulate that one must be clean and presentable to enter the afterlife. Cosmetics for all, both men and women of all social classes, used cosmetics. The most iconic feature was the heavy black coal eyeliner, made from ground galena. This had a practical purpose, reducing the sun's glare and repelling flies, but it also had a magical dimension, believed to ward off the evil eye. Green eye paint, made from malachite, was also popular. Lips and cheeks were tinted with red ochre. These practices were not seen as deceitful, but as an enhancement of one's natural beauty, pleasing to both humans and the gods. Perfumes and ointments. Scent was a crucial part of daily life and religious ritual. Perfumes were made from flowers and fragrant plants macerated in oil. As alcohol was not used as a base, Egyptians would anoint their bodies with these scented oils to moisturize the skin, protect it from the dry climate, and create an alluring personal fragrance. During celebrations, cones of scented fat were placed on the heads of guests, which would slowly melt over their wigs and clothes, releasing a continuous perfumed hair and body hair, while elaborate wigs were common for the elite. Egyptians also cared for their natural hair, using oils and henna. Lice were a persistent problem, leading many to shave their heads and beards. Conversely, body hair was often considered undesirable, and a method of hair removal known as sugaring, using a paste of sugar, lemon, and water was practiced to achieve smooth skin. These intricate rituals surrounding the body highlight a culture that celebrated physical existence. From the gods they worshipped to the symbols they revered and the daily care they took of their bodies, the ancient Egyptians viewed sexuality and beauty as integral components of a life lived to the fullest, both on earth and in the eternal hereafter. The ambiguity of homosexuality, power, love, or brotherhood. When examining the topic of same-sex relationships in ancient Egypt, we enter a realm of scholarly debate fueled by tantalizing but inconclusive evidence. Unlike ancient Greece, where male-male relationships were a documented and accepted part of the social structure, the Egyptian record is far more opaque. There are no laws explicitly condemning or condoning homosexual acts, and the term homosexuality itself is a modern construct that doesn't map neatly onto ancient perceptions. The most prominent piece of textual evidence comes from the mythological story of the contendings of Horus and Seth. In this tale, the god Seth, in his struggle for the throne of Egypt, attempts to dominate his nephew Horus by sexually assaulting him. The act is framed not as one of desire or love, but as an aggressive assertion of power and an attempt to humiliate and subordinate a rival. Horus, with the help of his mother Isis, cleverly thwarts the attempt by catching Seth's semen and tricking Seth into consuming Horus's own. The story's focus is on power dynamics and legitimacy, not on sexual orientation, but it remains a significant depiction of a same-sex sexual encounter in Egyptian mythology. Perhaps The most compelling and touching piece of evidence is the joint tomb of Nianchim and Khnimhotep at Saqqara, dating to the 5th dynasty, c. 2400 BC. Both men held the title of overseer of the manicurists of the great house. Their tomb is lavishly decorated with scenes depicting them in poses of extraordinary intimacy, far exceeding the typical representations of male colleagues or brothers. In one famous scene, they stand nose to nose, the most intimate embrace in Egyptian art, with their arms around each other. Scholars are divided on the interpretation. Some argue they were brothers, possibly twins, sharing a tomb out of close familial affection. Others firmly believe they were a same-sex couple, and that their beautiful tomb is a testament to their lifelong partnership, sanctioned and honored by the society in which they lived. If the latter interpretation is correct, their tomb stands as one of the world's earliest and most profound monuments to same-sex love, family, planning, contraception, and abortion. In the papyri, the ancient Egyptians possessed a notable understanding of gynecology and pharmacology, as evidenced by medical texts like the Kahun and Ebers papyri. These documents reveal a clear desire to control fertility and engage in sexual activity without the consequence of pregnancy, indicating that sex was valued for pleasure and intimacy, not just for procreation. They developed various contraceptive methods which were essentially pessaries, devices or substances inserted into the vagina to act as a barrier. The recipes combined a degree of magical thinking with ingredients that may have had some practical effect. Crocodile dung. One of the most famous recipes involved mixing crocodile dung with fermented dough. While it sounds repulsive, the alkaline nature of the dung might have had a minor spermicidal effect, and it certainly would have acted as a physical barrier. Acacia and honey. A more effective prescription involved a mixture of acacia gum, dates, and honey, applied to a fiber tampon. Modern science has shown that fermented acacia gum produces lactic acid, a known spermicide still used in some contraceptive jellies today. Honey's sticky nature would also have helped to block or slow sperm. The papyri also contain references to remedies intended to cause a woman to cease to conceive, which can be interpreted as either long-term contraceptives or abortifacients. The instructions are often vague, blending medicinal plants with ritualistic utterances, making it difficult to determine their intended function or effectiveness. Nonetheless, their existence demonstrates that the full spectrum of family planning was a concern in ancient Egypt. Wisdom literature. Advice on love and lust, beyond the mythological and medical texts. A genre known as wisdom literature offers insight into the accepted social and moral codes surrounding sexual behavior. These texts, typically framed as advice from a wise elder, like a father to his son, were guides to living a successful, righteous, and orderly life. Within them, sexuality is often discussed as a potential source of trouble that a prudent man should manage carefully. The instructions of Tehotep, a text from the Old Kingdom, warns a young man about the dangers of liaisons with women. If you want to maintain a friendship in a house you enter, beware of approaching the women. The place where they are is not good. It is not wise to get too close. This is less a condemnation of women or sex and more a pragmatic warning against adultery and the social chaos it could cause. Similarly, the instructions of Ani from the New Kingdom advises, take a wife while you're young. Beware of a woman who is a stranger. Don't let her capture your heart. The primary concern is the stability of the family unit and the protection of one's property and reputation. These texts provide a sober counterpoint to the romantic love poems and erotic art, showing that while sexuality was celebrated, it was also expected to be channeled within the accepted boundaries of marriage and social order to avoid conflict.